Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to Vox Populi News. I'm your host, Farrah Prudence. You can find us at voxpopulinews.net as well as on our Facebook page, Vox Populi News. Today we have an amazing guest. I am so honored to be speaking with him, Dr. Bill Warner, founder of C-SPI. Dr. Bill Warner holds a PhD in physics and math. He has been a university professor, businessman, and applied physicist. Dr. Warner has a lifelong interest in religion and its effects on history. He has studied the source texts of the major religions for decades. Even before the destruction of the World Trade Centers, he had actually predicted the war between Islam and America. The day after 9/11, he decided to make the source texts of Islam available for the average person. Dr. Warner coined the term Foundational School of Islamic Studies, which holds that Islam is found in the trilogy of Quran, Sirah, and Hadith. Dr. Warner founded the Center for the Study of Political Islam, known as C-SPI, and is its director. Welcome to the show, Dr. Warner. Thank you so much for being with us.
We're delighted to be here.
Thank you. Let's start first on maybe the most recent incident with comments in regards to Islam. Dr. Ben Carson had made a statement. It was a teeny tiny comment about Sharia law not being compatible with the American Constitution. And he has had an amazing amount of support as well as attacks on him because of it. How would you actually respond to those? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I think let's analyze what we're talking about here, which is Sharia law. And I think by the time we get to talking about Sharia law, the conclusions will be obvious. The Sharia, we don't even need to say law. The Sharia is a codification of the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith. So if you want to know how a Muslim should marry, pray, draw up a will, whatever, it's all found in the Sharia because it takes all these points and pulls them all together. If you read the original material, the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith, it's very awkward and bulky, and so the Sharia codifies all of these things. So the Sharia is derived from the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith, and so what's in those is in the Sharia. Now what's important here is that as a constitution, if we want to view that, because that's what Dr. Carson compared it to as our constitution, we need to understand there's some very different fundamentals. For instance, under our constitution, there's a great deal of effort made, and it's ongoing, to make sure that all are equal before the law. That is, a white person, a gay person, a straight person, a black person, that we're all equal in front of the law.
Right.
That's one of the fundamentals. But inside of the Sharia, there are different classifications. One of those is women. Women are treated differently than men under the Sharia. And there's a special class of people called the kafir, the non-Muslim, who are treated very differently under the Sharia. Indeed, the Sharia calls for the kafir to be subjugated. So the other principle here we have to understand is, in contrasting it with the Constitution, Article 6 of the Constitution says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Well, there's a contradiction here because the Sharia says, no, the law of Allah is the supreme law of the land. So I agree with Dr. Carson, and I actually was delighted that he was so bold as to make the statement. What we see in him is a courage that most people in the United States don't have anymore. People don't speak honestly because they don't want to offend. And you mentioned why. If you offend Islam, you get jumped all over by the media who carries water for Islam.
Correct.
So I agree with Dr. Carson.
Wonderful. I agree too. I have a question for you, and it's been baffling me for so long. And then I came across one of your videos a year ago, I think, and I was astounded by the significance of the theory that you have on Islam when it comes to the West. It seems to me every time Muslims do an attack, carry out an attack, even though our president would like to say it's a lone wolf act,
Right.
every time they carry out an attack, it seems like we blame ourselves. America says, well, if we weren't so rude, maybe they wouldn't kill us. Maybe we should give them more leniency. Maybe we should implement Sharia law. Maybe we should do this, do that. Why is it that they kill and we go out of our way even more for them? You had a theory about the West being or having an abused woman syndrome. I love it. Please explain it to me.
Well, let me give you the history to this.
Okay.
My wife and I work together, both in running the business and intellectually. She's my sounding board. And I'm talking about how we reacted to Islam. And I said, we're like an abused woman. And she looked at me and she says, well, she went inside. I do very little work on the internet. That's all she does. And she came back with a printout of a manual on rape and sexual abuse and brutalization of, that's not the title of it, but anyway, it's on how to deal with abused women.
Okay.
And we went through these points, and it was just like they were spot on. It's like the collective mind of the West always seeks to blame itself. Oh, if we'd only been not so rude, or if we'd have been more accepting and loving and open, if we'd only done this. But this is exactly what the abused wife says. Oh, well, I just need to work harder to please him. He says he won't do it again. And so when you go down through all these points, it is remarkable how we try to placate the abuser and take the blame for the abuser. And the Muslims, of course, play fully into this role because they get together and say, oh, look, we're the ones who's suffering. On 9/11, it's Muslims who were the victim. So they deny there's any brutality. And we don't hold their feet to the fire in terms of like, look, there's a reason for this. Let's talk about it. So I still think this is true because one of the ongoing problems I have is when you study the Quran, the Surah and the Hadith, it's like Islam is crystal clear once you understand the principle of dualism. It's crystal clear. Why can't we talk about this? So I'm for open, honest, fact-based reasoning, and no matter where the emotional consequences are. That is, if someone is offended by facts, they don't have a problem with me, they have a problem with the facts.
Exactly. I agree with you 100%. It is very hard to speak out without getting any backlash, and it seems it's from people who use words that are and terms that are not even related. You get called a racist. You get
What has that got to do? What has that got to do with my comments on the Sunnah of Muhammad?
Exactly. Or if you say that Muhammad married Aisha when she was 9 years old, you get called a bigot. And it's Wait a
minute. I'm quoting from Bukhari here.
Exactly. Exactly. I didn't come up with this.
The thing that amuses me is that there's the two people in this town of Nashville, Tennessee, who quote the most about Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad are the imams and me. Now, they get praised when I quote Muhammad, and I get condemned when I quote Muhammad. What's up with that?
There you go. You have that double standard that we have. But,
exactly.
A lot of people think that the jihad or the attacks of Muslims on the United States or on the West in general is a new thing. But it's really not. This is about 1,400 years old.
Yes. One of the things you can say about Islam is it is the most consistent ideology that we have. It hasn't changed in 1,400 years. Indeed, it is designed to never change. When people talk about reforming Islam, it's like, well, how do you reform what is perfect, eternal, and universal? You can't. So it's designed. So as a result, the observation, if somebody died in an act of jihad today, that jihad act was based on something that happened 1,400 years ago. That is, Muslims are commanded in over 91 verses in the Quran that they're to endlessly repeat forever the Sunnah of Muhammad. So jihad is caused by the Sunnah of Muhammad. Muhammad was excellent at jihad. It was what made him successful.
He was a brilliant war mind. I'll give him that much.
Oh, I say he was the most brilliant mind of war that has ever existed. For instance, Caesar, Alexander the Great, Napoleon, nobody dies for them today. But somewhere, someone in the world today died because of Muhammad. Indeed, his strength grows, whereas other political, military leaders, they get weaker as history goes on.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is I recently put out a video and people basically were saying, well, have you ever even met a Muslim? Now they don't know they don't know what my background is, but I don't
You get asked
need
the same
to meet
question?
a Muslim. Yeah, exactly. I don't need to meet a Muslim because there's 1.7 billion Muslims in the world. All I need to know is Muhammad, and they don't
Exactly.
Yes, there you go. They don't understand that Muhammad is the ultimate role model for Muslims. So what did I know there's plenty of points, but 10 points. Can I just ask you some questions because you've understood it. Did Muhammad marry a 9-year-old girl?
That's what Bukhari says, and he is the prime source of the Sunnah of Muhammad.
Okay. So this is actually in Islamic doctrine. Nobody else is writing this anywhere else?
It's exceedingly clear.
Okay. And what about Beni Khaybar? That was a Jewish village that was next to Medina.
Yes. Well, those attacks all happened. Muhammad, when he moved to Medina, it was half Jewish and half Arab. Mm-hmm. And it was either 2 years or 3 years after he was in Medina, it was free of Jews. And this was the reason caused by the fact that he attacked the 3 tribes there one at a time. And there's some lessons in this, by the way. The Jews never coalesced into an alliance against him. He took them down one at a time, which is part of the history of Islam. People do not form coalitions against it.
So by what you said right now, this is probably the root hatred between Islam and Jews from the Muslim side.
Oh, when people start talking about the Palestinian question, or ever how you want to put it, they want to go back to the formation of Israel in 1947 or 48, and I never can remember which it is.
1948?
48. And I say, no. We need to go much further back, 1,400 years. That's where the problem starts, and that's where the problem will remain. Now, what's interesting here is that the Muslims are very clear about this. It's the Jews in Israel who are not clear about this. I know a Jewish scholar who's a great scholar on the Quran, and I ask him, what's up with the Israelis and their denial of Islamic doctrine? He says, I wish I knew. But I can tell you this, as an Israeli who does quote from Islamic doctrine, I get abused mightily for being a bigot.
Oh, my goodness. It is. I see it all the time. And I see it from even the Jewish side. I see Jews that I'm like, what are you talking about? This is not something that Israel did something wrong and offended them and now they're retaliating against it. This is deeply embedded in their history and in their doctrine.
And you're quite right, by the way. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and some of the biggest supporters of Islam in Nashville are Jews who absolutely refuse to read anything about Muhammad. They go to these interfaith gatherings, and by the way, Christians do the same thing, and whatever the Muslims say, they remind me of, you ever seen a mother bird feed a baby bird? The baby bird throws its head back and its mouth is wide open and the mama bird just drops the food in.
Yes.
Those baby birds with their mouths open are the Jewish and Christian religious leaders. They swallow without question every bit of morsel they're given by Islam.
I agree, and I have seen it so many times. But, it is important to mention that unless you, or to me at least, unless you are fluent in Arabic, and even then, it could be very difficult to understand Islam, and you can't really just refer to the Quran alone.
No.
You have actually translated and have books on the Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, the Sirah. You've made it available. Your books are fantastic, by the way.
Well, that's my whole goal. When I had 3 phases of study on the subject of Islam. I started my study of Islam. I'm a 74-year-old man, and I started when I was 30. So I started my study of Islam 43 years ago. And what I did was I went to a Sufi teacher, and I was interested in mystical Islam. And I did that for about a year. And the reason I left is that it struck me that the Sufi teacher was not exactly crystal clear about some aspects of Islam that I wanted to know about, and those included jihad. So the next phase of study was when I was a college professor, and I had many Muslim students. And I was like, there's a subtle difference here. And so I sat down and did a much more in-depth study of the Quran, and the Quran led me to Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
Then after 9/11, I realized that I lived in a nation that didn't know a Sikh from a Hindu, from a Muslim, from a witch doctor.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, that's true.
And they just knew nothing about it. And so I decided what I would, as a scientist, I know this. Once you grasp the fundamental laws of something, you then have mastered the entire subject. After that, it's just application of the laws. And so what I wanted to do was make the fundamental laws of Islam easily available to everybody. And so that's what I've done. I took the Sirah, which is an 800-page book in fine print, and made it such that anyone can pick it up and read it. Now, you may say, well, what if you did it wrong? That is, what if I have errors? Mm-hmm. Or what if I just have bias? Well, the purpose of my books is not for you to read and believe what I write. The purpose of my books is for you to read them, and now then you're ready to read the original material. Do that make sense?
Yes, that makes perfect
sense. So I teach
sense.
you in a 3-step process. That is, I've got the Life of Muhammad in an 80-page book. Mm-hmm. Anyone can read it. I've got it in a 200-page book. And once you finish both of those, you're ready to read, if you want to, the 800-page volume yourself. It's the same with the Quran. Once you finish my Qurans, you can pick up the, quote, real Quran and read it and understand it. As a matter of fact, it becomes quite transparent. So what I teach is a systematic training in Islam which allows the student not to believe what I say, not to believe what I write, but to read the original material and believe it for themselves.
That's such a help, and I wish a lot more people would go ahead and get it. You know, I was reminded the other day, I was contacted by a Pakistani Muslim, and he was telling me that what I was saying about the Quran was not true. And when I asked him if he had ever read the Quran, he said no.
No.
And the problem is, I think it's a lot like maybe Catholicism in, say, I don't know, the Dark Ages, when people didn't really read the Bible. You just listened to what the priest said.
That's exactly right.
But they take it for what it is.
Well, what happens here is the imam,
mm-hmm.
You know, there's a verse in the Quran which says that Muslims are not to ask difficult questions.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is the most, as a scientist, I'm like, well, those are the best questions.
Exactly.
Those are the good ones.
Don't challenge anyone. Just take it as it is.
So what we have here is that this furnishes a job for the imam. Mm-hmm. He becomes the priest who can interpret the scriptures. And it is astounding how many Muslims there are who have not read the Life of Muhammad. As a matter of fact, I have an extensive library on Islam, and one of them is a book called Leaving Islam. And it is a book written by, edited by Ibn Warwick, and these are all apostates from Islam. And by the way, Ibn Warwick is an apostate from Islam as well.
Okay.
And all their stories are the same. They all left Islam after they read Muhammad or they read the Quran cover to cover. So what everyone needs to read the Quran. Everyone needs to read the Life of Muhammad. Actually, I suggest to people you read the Life of Muhammad first. Then when you read the Quran, it will make sense.
That I agree with you. I agree with you 100%.
And by the way, let us say here that no scholar has ever existed in the history of humanity who could interpret the Quran without knowing the life of Muhammad. It's not that this is a special thing for me or you. The most brilliant scholars of the Quran all agree that you need to know Muhammad's life because that gives you the key to abrogation. The latter verse is superior to the earlier verse. Well, only with Muhammad's life do you know what came later and what came earlier.
Exactly.
So start with Muhammad. And besides that, it is a fascinating book. I mean, he rose from being an orphan to the first king of a united Arabia. It really is an incredible plot.
It is an incredible plot. A lot of people say that Muhammad, or that Islam is kind of the trilogy of the Abrahamic religions, which it's really not. And a lot of people say, well, it derives its origins from the Judeo-Christian traditions because it mentions some of the same stories. Can you please shed some light on this?
Well, let me say this. The Quran is what I call a derivative work. That is, it comes from many sources: pagan Arabia, the Jews, and the Christians, and even the Zoroastrians, which most people don't know who they are at all. But if you know the doctrine of the Jews, and you know the doctrine of Christianity, and also what the pagan religions were of Arabia, you can see that Muhammad put them all together in a new way and ordered them for a new purpose, but that the material, as I say, is derivative. I mean, the story of Moses, for instance, is told 38 times in the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, one of the things that's intriguingly different about the Quran and the Torah, or the Old Testament, is that the Old Testament is filled with wonderful stories. When you read the Quran, the stories are never complete. There's always pieces missing. And furthermore, when they're repeated, they change subtly. So, but anyway, no, if you understand other religions, you can understand Islam. Now, what Muhammad did was he hitched his caboose to the Jewish prophet train, is the way I put it.
Exactly.
That is, what he said was, he said, because if you're in your middle 40s and you come out and start saying God is talking to you, people are going to look at you and go, really? Can you show me some proof for that? And his proof was, I am of the Archangel Gabriel, who's talking to me, was the same archangel who talked to the Jewish prophets. So therefore, if the Jewish prophets were true, I am true. So but now then, of course, when he goes to Medina, things change, because there were Jews in Medina, and they looked at Muhammad and said, no, you're not a prophet.
Yeah.
But if you understand if you understand Jewish scripture, Christian scripture, and others, then most of what's in Islam is like, there's only one new idea. There's two new ideas in the Quran, I say.
Mm-hmm.
In the Quran written in Mecca, the early Quran, the new idea is Muhammad is the prophet of God. In the second part of the Quran, Medinan Quran, the new idea is, if you do not believe that Muhammad is the prophet of God, you can be harmed. And all the other ideas are reworked.
Okay, and that has obviously stayed with us till today. Now, there's two myths circulating, and I have my own conviction and opinion about them based on my own life, but I would love to hear yours. The two myths is your friendly Muslim neighbor who doesn't miss a prayer, and ISIS being a radicalized form of Islam. I know, field day, right? Have at it.
Okay, here we go. First off, I do not measure Islam by Muslims. I measure Islam by its own doctrine. Therefore, if I want to discuss a Muslim, I ask, how much of the doctrine of Islam does he practice? And the nice Muslim neighbor who prays 5 times a day is practicing the early part of the Quran, the Meccan Quran. No problems here. However, there's part of the Quran and the Islamic doctrine that he is not practicing. That is the part practiced by Islamic State. Now, Islamic State practices all the doctrine of Islam, both that of Mecca and that of Medina. If you read Islamic State's material, they are exquisitely, painfully careful to show that everything they do has a precedence in the doctrine of Islam.
Absolutely.
And so anyway, I grade Islamic State's papers and go, yep, you get an A.
Oh, A+. I have never met more devout Muslims. They are following it to the T.
To the last T.
Absolutely, to the last T. So, let me ask you this. CARE, the Center for American Islamic Relationships, has put out a campaign, I believe a couple of years ago, that's still going on right now, saying that jihad is self-betterment. And they show little videos of little Ahmed studying and saying, that's his jihad because he's studying. And little Amna is, planting a tree. That's her jihad because she's helping the environment.
Yes.
How accurate is that?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question that way. How accurate is it? Because we can measure the accuracy of that statement. And it turns out that what they're saying is true. But let's measure how true. And is it the complete truth? We've mentioned the word Bukhari before. He's a collector of hadiths or traditions. Mm-hmm. If we go through all of Bukhari, and there's about 7,000 hadiths, we'll discover that 21% of them relate to jihad. Mm-hmm. So let's round that to 20%, 7,000. That's 1,400 little stories about jihad.
Okay.
Now let's sort those 1,400 stories into two piles: inner struggle, religious struggle, and killing the kafir. If we do that, we'll discover that a little less than 2% of the hadiths, the Bukhari, are about doing good works and struggling against bad personal problems. That is, maybe you get angry too easily, and your jihad is you want to become less angry.
Okay.
That's true. 2% correct, but 98% correct is jihad of the sword. So let's grade CARE's material. They get a 2% because they say that all of jihad is the inner jihad. That's 2%. Now, I was a college professor, and if you take a test from me and you get 2% on the test, you will receive an F. So I'm grading CARE's paper and saying, you get an F.
F minus. I'm going to vote for F minus.
Okay.
You have to get an F minus.
But you see my method?
2%. Yes, absolutely. I love it. I love how you take mathematical formulas and statistics and actually just apply math. Just simple, universal math.
And so we can say that CARE is, yes, you're correct, 2% correct.
Okay.
And I'm giving you everything you asked for, by the way. I'm not even arguing with you. I'm saying, yes, you're right, 2% right.
So when you're talking about scientific theory, if something is 2% correct, that's negligible.
If I sold you a car and it worked 2% of the time, would you be happy?
Probably not, no. No, I would not. I would call that a lemon, Dr. Warner.
That is a lemon, and I think we have a lemon there. By the way, I'm proud to say, although they took the honor away from me, at one time, CARE said that I was part of America's inner circle of hate.
Oh.
And I was like, hey, yeah, I like that, because I saw the other people on the list. I says, yeah, I know these people, I like them. And they took me off. So if you have any influence with CARE, you can tell them, put Warner back on the hate list.
That is a great honor, actually, because here's what I believe: if nobody considers you an enemy, you have not stood up for what you believe in. Period.
You got it.
Period.
You got it.
I agree with you. Now, I want to, there's so much that we can talk about, but you actually go around. You have videos up on YouTube. You break it down. You break everything down. Your books are available. They're very affordable, by the way. It doesn't seem like you're doing this for profit at all. But what is going on in Europe with the refugees? I know you just got back from a trip over there. Have you heard anything that is not being conveyed to us by the media?
I'm going to give you the words of Salman Hussein. I think I've said his name right. Okay. He is an apostate from Islam. And he's been talking with of course, Arabic is his native language.
Okay.
He's been talking with these so-called Syrian refugees. And he said two things are true. They're neither Syrian nor are they refugees. He said some of these people have spent as much as $18,000 to go to Germany. He said that's not a refugee.
Oh, my gosh.
He said, when I was a refugee, I would not throw away a bottle of water from the Red Cross. He said, I have literally drunk water from a mud puddle.
Oh, my goodness.
So he says they're not Syrian either.
I've seen a couple of videos, just the ones that are kind of passed around on